This is the Rebel Scum Podcast. Available in video on YouTube and audio wherever you listen to your podcasts. Every week, Brock and James talk the latest rumors, news, and theories from a galaxy far, far away. Support us on Patreon for exclusive offers and join the Star Wars discussion. Patreon.com/Rebel Scum Podcast. Here are your hosts, Brock and James.
You're always scum. Rebel Scum.
Thanksgiving joke here. Welcome to our Thanksgiving Roundtable. As usual, we got to do something for Thanksgiving. We got Pete here. We got James here. We got Brock here. We're talking the future of Star Wars on Disney Plus.
Our resident turkey is with us. Thanksgiving turkey.
Yes.
Pete.
Third straight year doing the Thanksgiving show. I'm honored. I'm like one of those big floating balloons on down the street in New York City.
That would be amazing. I would love it. Have you ever been to that parade? Any of the?
I went once. To
Really?
Macy's Thanksgiving. Yeah, it was cool, but it's so funny. I am so lucky to live like between New York and Philadelphia. And I used to work in New York City, and people like will save money their entire lives to spend a week in New York, and I'm like, oh, I hate this place. It's so but it was really cool to see it, just see it once. But I'm good. I don't need to do it again. I'm happy.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I'm one of those people that loves New York. I love going there.
Yeah,
we have mini New York. It's Steve Martin from 30 Rock. Toronto. It's like New York, but without all the stuff. It's like the most accurate description.
Toronto, though. I love Toronto.
Well, the Leafs beat the Flyers, so we'll always have that.
and probably always is a good way to put it.
Oh, well, we'll see. They are not if they meet in the first round of the playoffs. Then the Flyers.
I just hope one of those two teams wins the Stanley Cup in our lifetime. That would be nice.
You can hope all you want.
Keep hope alive.
Let's get into it. We're going to talk some Star Wars. And on streaming Star Wars, and Pete, you might know a little bit about streaming Star Wars, just a touch about that. First of all, Andor came to an end, whatever, however you want to word it. We won't do any spoilers for the ending of Andor, not because we're recording this early, just because of out of respect.
Right.
But so far, Pete, let's go. Let's do Pete and Brock. Thoughts on Andor? Not comparing it to anything else, just Andor itself.
Right. I don't want to get caught up in that social media. Well, it makes Kenobi look better. No.
Yeah, like that. Like, I mean, like, it doesn't mean like just Andor on its own.
On its own, it's, I the day that we're having this conversation, I had just, I put together some thoughts about it because it's honestly, it's I love everything about it. The biggest challenge with it, especially as we talked about sort of favorite episodes of live action, is it's hard to kind of pull it out because it's one big story. And what I love about it is that it's really taken some risks. It's showing us the world of Star Wars that we loved as kids or whoever, whenever you got into it, the world of lightsabers and Jedi and space battles, but showing you that level that's all built on. And it's really, I think that's one of the challenges for people who are saying it's slow or it's boring or whatever. And it's because when you see the Star Wars logo, your expectation is you're going to get adventure and action. And this is drama. This is deep human drama. And my overall thoughts on it, I'm so enthralled by every single episode. It's just a masterpiece in the way it's done, and it's very different from traditional Star Wars, and I think that's okay.
Brock, I know you have a lot of issues with this series, most of it because it's so good. But what just give your thoughts on Andor.
As usual, I'm a shill for Disney, but like Andor, it's something I still have to like sit on, but I arguably is the best Star Wars out right now, period, end of sentence. I mean, it puts movies to the test. It feels like a movie, and it's there is some stuff you kind of have to, okay, you have to watch 2 or 3 episodes first to get the vibe of how this story works. But and that's why they released 3 episodes right off the bat. But it's like, I was just thinking about it's like when you discovered the Ralph McQuarrie concept art for Star Wars, where you're just like, wow, look at this. Like, look what they were like, maybe it could be this. And now it's like, it's Star Wars, but it's like, it's a whole new level of Star Wars that I don't know if we ever conceived of. It's almost as like the imagination you had as a kid when you love Star Wars is like, here it is. And it's just, yeah, it pushes the envelope and like flips the script. And it's great. I mean, Mandalorian might be more of your run-of-the-mill adventure, which is fun. But like Andor is like, we've been dying for Star Wars to go to the next level. And I think this is the catalyst for that, which is funny because Catalyst was a book that started Rogue One, which is also in that universe.
Yep.
I think like it, I don't know. It's, yeah, like as much as Mandalorian was like, wow, we can do something that's almost Jedi, bereft of any Jedi, and now it's like Andor. So it's like those two go toe to toe, and I think you could argue for hours on which one is the better one. So love it.
I think it's intriguing that we have 3, 4, whatever Star Wars live action shows that you can't compare this one to. And you can compare Boba Fett to Mando, obviously Ahsoka, Mando, Skeleton Crew, Mando. They're all I'm guessing because they're all Favreau, Filoni. But this one's like, you can't compare them. They're apples and oranges. You can enjoy them both, or you can dislike them both. But you couldn't put one up against the other. I don't think it wouldn't be fair to either one because they're both very different. And Andor, you hear the criticisms about Andor and you hear the praises about Andor, and it baffles me a lot on both sides. From a lot of it is like what people seem to like about it is what made them, not like, is what it goes against liking from Star Wars in a lot of ways. And then what they don't like it's so interesting to me to hear people talk about it in that way, because it is very different, and it's very Star Wars, but it's very not Star Wars. And I've always said, Brock, that it's like, that's because this is in the Rogue One universe, not so much the grander Star Wars universe. It's kind of more grounded in that world, and they're really sticking to it, and I love it. But you still get the sense that the world that we've seen around it exists within it, even the prequels.
It's interesting to me because I said on our streaming Star Wars show a couple of weeks ago that I haven't watched any of the other live series, and actually I don't think I've watched any Star Wars movies in the time since I've been watching Andor, since the show started. And I wonder how they're going to strike me, right? Because I saw a still picture it was a GIF of Book of Boba Fett, and I looked at it and I said, it's the same universe. They've captured that, but man, this is like mythology and action and adventure. And this is world building. Andor is world building and character studies and sort of the other thing that's very interesting about it to me is this is I hate to say Star Wars for adults, but I can call it that because my son, who came with me to Star Wars Celebration, who loves The Mandalorian, loved the Book of Boba Fett, loves Clone Wars, has had zero interest in this show. We watched the first episode and he was like, okay, big deal. And then I was watching the Narkina 5 episode, the prison escape one, spoiler. And he walked in and he watched that, but because, that had action and gunfights and things like that. So it is Star Wars for adults. And what's interesting too about it is that it holds a mirror up against kind of the world that adults who grew up on Star Wars, whether you're 30, 50, 60, 20, if you grew up on Star Wars, you are now looking at our world now. And I'm not going to bring this down into some dark political hole, but I mean, the fact is that it's showing sort of the dark side of our world. And I'm not saying, our backyard, but certainly around this planet, there is some really horrible things going on. And this is kind of a reflection of that, which, Star Wars, it's obviously about war and all the horrors of war. But, when you're shooting down stormtroopers like, clay pigeons, they don't mean anything. But when you're seeing people, in this close up real situation, it changes the way you look at war. It changes the way you look at the Empire.
I can tell you, I watched Boba Fett since starting Andor. I rewatched it with my wife. She hadn't seen Boba Fett yet, and I still love it. I like Boba Fett. I was one of the people that liked Boba Fett. I love Boba Fett.
Okay.
And I rewatched it, and I said, I still love it. And I watched Andor like the next day. I'm like, yeah, I love this. And they didn't really conflict with me at all.
Yeah.
And I guess they feel different. You know what it is? Andor Book of Boba Fett looks nice. Andor looks beautiful, but it looks more, like you said, it's more mature, more adult looking.
Yeah.
It looks like, to Brock's point, a film more so. But you bring up going, it is more of an adult film, and I can see kids being not turned off, but just not interested in what they're doing on Andor because it doesn't have what kids are there for.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think like this is shot much more like, there's been a lot of comparisons to Kubrick and those sort of things. And it is everything about this show is very deliberate. Every lingering camera shot, every angle. And again, it's conversational. Some of the best episodes of this show had no laser fire. They're just great episodes that just pulled you in. And again, it's so cool to be able to appreciate a deep story about the human condition, about the terrors of an oppressive government, and be able to watch that and just know it's in a universe that we love to hang out in. And that's kind of a cool way to enjoy it. It's clearly Star Wars. There's Star Wars stuff all around it. But it's got its own kind of vibe, which is so cool and refreshing, and hey, I can't wait for Ahsoka and Book of Boba Fett season 2 if they ever do that, and season 3 of Mando, and I'm so excited about this. And unlike some people on social media, I'm not like, well, it better look like this is the new standard. No, it's a way to tell the story. Look, I'm not a comic book fan, but I can tell, I know that there's different artists, different look and feel for different comic books, different writers. Kevin Scott writes very different than Jason Fry, than Claudia Gray, but they're still telling stories in that universe that I care about. So I think that's the way to look at this. It's a Star Wars story, just told slightly different.
I think as fans, we've like written ourselves into a corner or painted ourselves into a corner where now it's like you in a post in Infinity War, Endgame, I'm trying to think of what else is big. Just any like those big spectacle movies now where we're like, it has to link and it has to work all together and it has to have an amazing conclusion. So it's like, it's okay if you don't like it. Like my wife has been watching Andor with me. She's 4 episodes behind, but like she's always interested. Like we pay for Disney Plus, we might as well watch the new thing they're putting on the front page. But she's sort of like, this is a long show, and I keep saying, it's good, it's good, it's good. And then you get to the point where it's like, I like this show because of this. I really, really enjoy it, and that's just my feelings. And if you don't like it, it's cool. Like I understand. Like I've never had a desire to watch a show like Succession, but it has a massive following.
Right.
Will I ever get into it? I don't know. I'm curious because I hear about it, but it's like, if I'm not going to go and do it, then maybe it's not for me, and that's that. And it's like a show like Andor, like 2 years or when did they announce Andor? Like before COVID. So it's like, I've heard a lot of people say like this was never on my radar. Like, cause like, what did you need to know more about Cassian Andor?
True. Yeah.
So like this show has to push the envelope in some way where it's like, yes, we're engaged with this character, but then they're like, let's go an extra mile because this might work or it might not. And it's crazy because it's like the show is about Cassian, but it's really not about him. He's just sort of there, right? Or am I wrong?
Well, no, and I think I'm sorry, James. Go ahead.
No, it's your show. Go ahead.
It's not my show. It's the Turkey Thanksgiving show. It's the I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because it struck me in watching episode 11 that it's called Andor because it's not just Cassian, it's his mother, and it's the the legacy of that family. But what's interesting about Star Wars television, and maybe I'll help move this this ball down the field a little bit here, but what's interesting about Star Wars television is it very rarely is what the title is. Like Rebels, when I first heard about Rebels and I saw the first animation from it, I was like, oh, it's going to be a kid's show and it's going to be about some rebel group and I don't care. But Rebels is my camera just decided not to work anymore. Can you still hear me?
Oh yeah, we hear you.
Okay.
American cameras.
American cameras, man. It's that Canadian internet disconnect. I can't even play. Oh, there I am. Okay. Hi. Hello. But Rebels turned out to be a show about family, about a Jedi story, a Mandalorian story. The Mandalorian is not just about Din Djarin. It's a father-son story. It's much more than that. And I think where we're going is that may be the lead center of the story, but it's going to tell these much larger stories. And Andor, to what you were saying before, it strikes me also that every single Disney Plus series that has come on, when I first heard about it, even as a big Star Wars fan as I am, I've been a fan since 1977 when I saw it in the theaters at 7 years old. I was like, Mandalorian? Okay. I mean, that sounds a gunslinger. Cool. I'll check it out. And I love it. Book of Boba Fett. Do I really need Boba Fett's story? I didn't need it, but I needed it. The Kenobi show is probably the biggest example of me being like, oh, he lived in the desert for 20 years. Let's not go into that story. And it was 6 strong, exciting episodes. So, and Andor is the same exact thing. I was probably at the front of that train that was like, really? We need Cassian's story? But holy cow, it's been such a great story to hear.
Let's keep going down there because Andor, like you said, you didn't need any of those. And it's true because remember Boba Fett had the problem with the Mandalorian came in and kind of took over the show for a little while. No one knew what it was. But the thing is these are all subtitles to Star Wars, right? It's all part of that Star Wars story. And even if you watch the behind the scenes on the Book of Boba Fett, Favreau says that when they think about bringing in Mandalorian, they're like, well, we need to know what happened to these guys because they're part of this story. So it almost, they don't need, I still, Star Wars should just be episodes 1, 2, 3, 4 and then just keep going because it's all part of the same universe. It would get confusing because you wouldn't know where you were in those because they keep going back and telling these prequels. But it's fun. But Andor, like we said earlier, is much more mature. And we talked about Ahsoka coming out, and we don't need that. And the Skeleton Crew things coming out with Jude Law. But the one that intrigued me the most, I know it intrigued you, Brock, was the Acolyte. The Acolyte is one that, it sounds interesting. And they're going back 100 years before Phantom Menace. So we're getting a little bit of the High Republic. It's going to be, who knows what it's going to be. Russian doll, I can't remember her name. She's doing it.
Leslie Headland. Yeah.
There you go. I want to ask you guys this question now because Andor, Pete, you said earlier, like, oh, people are like, all Star Wars shows better look like this now. Acolyte isn't in that Favreau Filoni verse. It isn't in the Rogue One verse. It's in the High Republic, which is only in print. Do either of you think, Brock, I'll start with you. Do you think there's the opportunity for it to maybe piggyback off of Andor and be a little bit more mature? Do you think it's going to maybe be a little bit more like Mando, or could it live somewhere in the middle or something else that I haven't said?
I think all Star Wars projects should be, you've chosen a person or a group of people to create something, so they should be allowed to create their vision. And then if it fails, it fails, because we've seen what happens with Solo when you intervene on something where it's like it starts being something and it becomes something else, which wasn't terrible, but like it's like how they fired Trevorrow off of 30. It's like, this is what it could have been. It's like, no, that doesn't exist. If you want to do a what if show, which did they kind of do that with Star Wars? A what if show with then yeah, okay. But then it's just like, but Star Wars isn't that. Like, it's like we don't talk about alternate dimensions in Star Wars yet. So it's like, let's not live in the what if. It's like, here it is. If you don't like it, don't. That's fine. But it's just like Acolyte, because it's supposed to be the tail end of the High Republic. I'm very interested in it because I really like the books, but it's also frustrating the High Republic as a whole, like because like the new what are they calling it? Chapter, new series or phase?
Yeah.
Phase 2. I think it started, but it's only in comics and it's gone back another 100 years. I'm like, what's going on here? So it's like, do I want that Acolyte thing? Absolutely. Leslie Headland, great stuff. Cast looks phenomenal.
Yeah.
And the way they've described it is like, that's very cool. So I'm in, and I hope I think I've asked this before. I think there was like we did on Holo News that like it's had more. It's almost as the same amount of viewers that Mandalorian has, Andor. So it's people are watching it. So I don't know how they rate the Disney Plus stuff. So it's like, how do we know if Andor is a success? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I guess it's how many watches they get. So I don't feel like I've seen any report on like highest. Like they have said that about Marvel, but I don't feel like they do that with Star Wars. So it's like, if Andor is doing well, does that push Acolyte, which is a very interesting idea that most people aren't going to be like, what are you talking about? It could be. I hope I can say anything until I'm blue in the face, but until we get some real images or trailers, it's like, I don't know what this is going to be. And I think we said that about Andor as well.
Yeah, but I'm excited about not the only thing. I mean, look, I'm not anti High Republic. I just haven't gotten to it.
Oh yeah,
me neither.
And everybody that I know that I consider, friends and / Star Wars friends who's engaged in it loves it. So that's cool. I think, again, when Solo came out, that was the first and feels like the only flub that they've had when it comes to explaining things that are a little bit, because of the fact that they do jump all over the timeline, right? So I remember watching Solo with my good friend, the guy who I go watch all these movies with on the Thursday nights. We catch the early before we go with the kids. And I remember watching Solo, and of course I've seen Clone Wars, and I'm a freaking nerd. And so when Darth Maul came up on the way out, I had to explain to him, like, okay, so here, let me tell you about this thing. There's this Crimson Dawn, there's this Dark Sun, there's this whole thing, and he was like, oh, okay. But they didn't explain that at all. Versus something like Mandalorian, who Ahsoka shows up, and I always use my dad as sort of the barometer. He's 75 years old. He's a Star Wars fan, but he watches movies and TV shows, live action. He doesn't watch anything other than live action. And I was like, so what did you think of that Ahsoka character? And he was like, oh, she was really cool. I was like, oh, you have no idea how cool she was. But they effectively brought her into the show where those of us, the three of us on the screen here, were like, oh my God, that's Ahsoka. That's amazing. And people like my dad or the casual fans, which, let's face it, are the bolus of the people spending money, they're able to enjoy the show and be like, oh, that character was cool. It'd be cool to know more about her. And if you're so inclined, you go watch the Clone Wars. If you're not, you're not. But that's where the Acolyte is going to play in a very interesting spot. They're going to have to be very, very judicious in setting up where it is, especially if it deals with sort of the introduction of Plagueis and or Palpatine or any of those characters, because it will confuse people. Because I remember when Rogue One came out, people were like, so was that Rey's mom? I don't understand. Like, and so that's the biggest challenge they're going to face with Acolyte. That said, I'm excited because I know nothing. I have no expectation for the show at all. At least like with Andor, we're like, well, we know that character and we know what happens to him, and he's a rebel spy. Okay, Acolyte, nothing, no idea at all. So
Acolyte's exciting because it's an old Padawan, not an old Padawan, but a former Padawan coming back with her Jedi Master to solve a mystery. It's kind of like let's have fun. Like that's what it feels like to me. I don't know if they're gonna have fun or not. I haven't seen it obviously. But have you guys both seen the image that they it's like a behind the scenes image of the show
Yeah,
being
with
shot?
Leslie and the
And the
dude
two
from Squid
actors.
Games, and yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay, that looked Star Wars to me.
Yep.
But you know what it reminded me of? You know, I can't remember the planet now where Zori Bliss is from in Rise of Skywalker.
Oh yeah.
Possibly the single greatest piece of Star Wars we've gotten.
I'm not going to comment.
But so it snows. So like, but it reminded me of that planet. Obviously, it's not that planet, but it felt very Star Wars to me. That's why I asked about the Andor thing, because it almost feels like it's going to be more like Mandalorian in terms of the look. I mean, obviously we're going from a behind the scenes picture, so we don't know what the cinematography is, but the set design looked a lot like that. Because Andor, as great as it is, Andor actually, it's very like BBC, right? Like it's very much a BBC show. And the droids, like everything is like Star Wars, but just a little different from Star Wars. Right?
Yeah.
Whereas like Mandalorian is like, you're like, oh, that's Star Wars. This one, like, you're like, we're somewhere. They're teetering on. They're really on that fine. I think they're doing a great job with it though, on that fine line. But Peter, I wanted to bring up Darth Maul, who's one of my favorite characters because he's Darth Maul.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, him and Solo. I think to that point, it was kind of like Ron Howard like called his son or something and said, which bad guy should we have? And they went with Darth Maul because he's cool. And that's part of the problem is, if they would have continued that story, your friend wouldn't have had an issue with Darth Maul, because eventually we probably would have got to that point. Right. Now, within the isolated film itself, that's a different story. But I think, they cut the thing at the knees, so there's no more Kira, no more Darth Maul. It's like, well, what is the point of Solo?
Yeah.
And we're probably never going to ever figure that out.
I do not think they will make Solo 2 happen, unfortunatately.
I think a Disney Plus series would have been nice, but I think that ship has that Falcon has sailed. That Millennium Falcon.
But it's interesting because the future of Star Wars storytelling. I think we had comedian Corey Ryan Forrester on our show, and he was like, if they never make another Star Wars movie but keep making good quality TV, I'm fine with that. And you know what? It's strange for me to say it, but I think I am too. And it's funny because I just went to go see Wakanda Forever, and of course I compared it to the Marvel TV shows, and the Marvel TV shows aren't the same quality. They're fun. I like them. There hasn't been a really bad one yet. I mean, and I do look at Marvel differently, right? I don't have Marvel helmets on the wall behind me, but
you spin it and it's all Marvel helmets.
Right. That's for my other podcast. But so I feel like there's a separation, whereas I feel like Star Wars is really truly telling, and maybe it's because Star Wars is built on the serial style of telling stories. I think Andor is benefiting from being, essentially an 8.5-hour movie told in 12 different chapters. I think even the Kenobi series, which I think was rumored to have started as a film and got broken up into a series. I think if you do it right, you can continue to live and tell those stories there, because Star Wars is driven by merchandising, right? I mean, not driven by, but benefits from, might be a better way to put it. And the live action TV show stuff is selling merchandise. It's, Mandalorian is selling merchandise. Grogu is selling merchandise. I don't think Andor will. I can't see too many 5-year-olds wanting a Luthen Rail, Black Series, but the adults that collect will want it. But where I'm going with that is they proved with Mandalorian that you can get that same sort of commitment to merchandise from a live action television series that you can from a film. Because if you then look at Rise of Skywalker merch, it did not sell at all. I mean, it bombed from a merch standpoint. So if you're looking at it from a business standpoint, I think you can tell those stories on Disney Plus. If you're looking at it from a storytelling standpoint, I think they've proven that it's a great medium to tell these longer form stories and bring it all together.
Yep.
I thought you were going to say something.
No,
But I think George Lucas. Look, George Lucas wrote was it Underworld, Underground, Shadowland, whatever that series, and he was like, it's too much. Yeah, it was like it's too much money to do it, so they didn't do it. And they're using a lot of those screenplays apparently they're not using them for the stories of Andor, but they're using them for information on Andor, learning about Coruscant and stuff like that. 20 Gilroy said they had all that. So, but I think this is where George Lucas wanted the franchise to go. Is on like he didn't know streaming was was it going to be, but I think this is what he always envisioned. And if this was around 10 years ago, I don't know if he would have sold it to Disney necessarily. Like at that point, he might have held on for a little bit longer onto his beloved Lucasfilm. He probably would have sold.
That's a really interesting question. Hypothetical. Would he have sold if he knew where streaming was? Because you're right. I totally agree. I think, there's still the videos of McCullum talking about Star Wars Underworld, I think is what it was called. And they had like 52 scripts written or something like that. They had like the whole thing ready to go. And it just was cost prohibitive. Now, they are spending a ton of money on these shows, but they're paying off. And honestly, that's the model that I don't understand. Like, to your point before, Brock, like, how do they know if it's working? The only thing they know is, did they lose subscribers or did they gain subscribers? At the end of the day, Visions is as successful as The Mandalorian because that's, they Disney Plus kept people or didn't lose people or gained people, right? So it is a very strange sort of, from a business perspective, it's tough to tell.
It's like anything in like the film or TV industry, but like especially with like George Lucas, he's always like a couple years too early, or he's at the cutting edge of it, right? Like you can say whatever you want about the prequel with the green screen prisons and stuff, but like without people like George Lucas putting that work into that, it's like you don't get to the volume, you don't get to better quality CG. I think. For every George Lucas, you get a Weta workshop with Guillermo del Toro. Like these well, I guess Guillermo del Toro is more in the Jim Henson vein, but they all kind of worked. They all like there's always a predecessor, so it's like it's funny. Like they're like we're not going to spend that much whatever money it was for Star Wars Underworld, but then like Amazon spent $1 billion on Ring of Power, and it did a good job. Like I mean, it's out. We could sit here for 2 to 3 hours and talk about which is better, House of Dragon or Ring of Power, but it's like they're both good.
I couldn't. I've only seen one of them.
Exactly, but you know what I mean. Like it's just like it's like I feel like we say this on Rebel Scum podcast like all the time, especially it's like you're gonna not like Marvel movies or Star Wars movies, but they're still movies. Like they're not absolute pieces of trash. Like they're generally stories that kind of like make sense to some point, and they look amazing. Like it's like we now kind of like after Andor, we're like, no, the volume just doesn't pop like being and it's like, but like when Mandalorian came out, I was like, that's not a real place. What? Right. They can control the sun. Like it's just like it's like anything. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. How did I even get on this? But it's like it's just like it's interesting how like a thought like 10 years ago was unheard of, and now it's a reality now. So who knows?
I love the volume, by the way, and I think they they're still figuring it out, and I think there are parts of Obi-Wan more than any of the other shows where I'm like, oh wow, that look. Mostly it's running. You can't run in front of the volume. Right. Andor. I am curious about Andor, because Andor has a lot of the shallow depth of field in it. I wonder how that plays out with something like the volume. Can you do it? Because the cinematographer of Rogue One and the Batman mentioned how it's better at dusk, and I thought the volume is used brilliantly in the Batman. You don't even know that it's there when they're on the rooftop.
Yeah, I didn't even know that.
So I think it's like green screen. Sometimes you're like, oh, that looks terrible, and sometimes you're like, what? That was fake. You don't know, and also I think sometimes, especially when it comes to Star Wars and Marvel, you need to just shut off your brain for that kind of stuff.
Sure.
When you're watching an Inquisitor from another planet spin a lightsaber, like maybe cut some slack.
Yeah, I literally saw somebody tweet about the way a lightsaber works is it wouldn't handle the weight and act as a spinning blade to carry somebody like a helicopter. I'm like, dude, there's explosions in space. Let's start with that, and then and space magic. Okay,
Sometimes when they shoot the door lock, it opens, but
Right.
sometimes when they shoot it, it locks. There's
Oh,
no science in
I
it
just
anymore.
see Star Wars is so unrealistic.
I like it when people say, when people are talking about Andor, like, this is how I like my Star Wars. I'm like, in A New Hope, Chewie and Han run down a hallway, face off 1,000 stormtroopers, and run the other way for a laugh. It's never been, it's like we put these movies on some kind of weird pedestal,
Yes.
and we forget that, really you just had a toy when you were a kid, and you had a good time. So maybe go back to that. Don't take it so damn seriously, because
You
they're a
hit it
joke.
right on the head, though. It's like it's something you embraced or took in as a child. So like it was probably the first time you saw something like that, and it's like you're chasing the idea of like the first time I saw that, like, oh, that's cool, like. I remember, like, how many you can think, like, back in the day when we just had to randomly guess what was on TV and we just went with it. How many movies or TV shows did you discover randomly on a weekend?
Oh,
Yeah.
man.
And you're like, what is this? It's like, why is Mel Gibson running around the desert with a weird thing? This is the Road Warrior. And you're like, what? And then you watch the original Mad Max and you're like, you can't watch. It's like, this is a different thing and much better. And this is like, what? So
But I
it's
think
like,
you bring up an awesome point,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
I've said this. So Book of Boba Fett was not my favorite series. It's not that I didn't like it a lot, because I really did, but I think I went in and I allowed my fan theory hat to take control of every single week. So by the time it got to the 7th episode, I was like, here's what's going to happen. The Pikes are going to do this, and this is going to happen. And I watched it myself at 5 a.m, and I was like, it was all right. And then I watched it that night with my 10-year-old son, and he literally at the end of the show was like, that was the best thing I've ever seen. And I mean, it's Boba Fett on a Rancor, and then a gunfight in the middle of the
Yeah.
street. And just, I was like, yeah, I guess you're right. It really was the best thing ever,
Yeah.
because it was so cool. But you have to go in that way. And I think that's what happens, not to bring it back to the Andor conversation, but that's what happens is and I think that's what's cool about this. And one of the things that I'd love to see is fans who haven't watched Star Wars in a while, who've become movie fans, who've become fans of, go watch Andor, because we're bringing you back to your Death Star playset and your action figures, but we're telling it in a story in a different style. And I think it's got the opportunity, which is why I think that they're distributing it across the 4 different Disney-owned networks, to be seen by a broader audience, for people to go, oh wow, this is intriguing, this is an intellectual thriller, this is something that I want to know more about. And oh, it doesn't matter, it's got TIE fighters in it, and somebody says something about a kyber crystal, it doesn't matter. That's like, it's like The Crown, except with TIE fighters and senators and stuff. So
I do want to talk to you guys about one thing, because you brought up it is going to be on network television. They're doing it on 4 of their channels, I think.
yeah,
Disney channels.
I think Hulu, FX.
It's kind of weird that they're doing the first 2 episodes and not the first 3, which really kind of feel like they work together. It could be a timing thing, I don't know. But I want to talk to both of you about this. And that's, I found, not so much with Mandalorian, and Brock, I mentioned this to you in the past, but with Boba Fett, Obi-Wan especially, and now a lot with Andor. And so it seems to be different ways of telling these stories. There are movies, there are weekly series, and then there's like the binge watching streaming series, like Stranger Things. I don't know if that works weekly. Do you know? Like, I feel like that is one you put it all together. I might watch it at one a week, but I like on your own pace, because it's basically one big giant movie. Whereas Mandalorian, one of my pet peeves, but it actually is what makes it a weekly series, is, okay, I'm here, and I'm gonna fly away at the end, and then that's your episode. But Boba Fett, Obi-Wan were kind of like those. Those were, hi Siri. They both felt like they both felt like one big long story, where I think they would have benefited from binge watching. Throw them all up, let me watch on my own pace. But Andor is is in between there, where they put those first 3 episodes together. And I almost feel like it would have worked even better if they put the first 3 episodes together, then the next 3 episodes together. Now, obviously, you don't get me every, for 12 weeks or whatever it is that way. But it feels like it's somewhere in the middle. Do you guys think that there is going to be a time where that is going to be a way for maybe Star Wars or any series to kind of go where there will be some will be binge, some will be weekly, and some will be 2, or 3.
I think really the Andor series, more than any of them, had very clearly defined ends to arcs, very much like Clone Wars, right? Clone Wars had
Yes.
a lot of 2 to 5 episode arcs, right? Mostly 3 episode arcs. I think that's a really interesting way to do it. What you're saying, James, I think it'd be a very cool way to do it. Put out 3 episodes, 3 weeks later, 2 weeks later, give us the next 3 episodes. I think what has been great about Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett to a degree is the fact that you do have this communal watching. It becomes appointment television, which is something that has been missed. But the difference is Mandalorian, you can watch season 2, episode 3 on its own and be like, that was a good episode. I like that one. But yeah, I think it is going to change I think there's going to be different ways to do things, just like you're saying. I noticed I was back to my dad's. I was at my dad's house a couple weeks ago with my kids, and we were talking about the topic of Stranger Things came up. And the first question you ask anybody when you talk about Stranger Things is, what episode are you on? Like, that's how you start the conversation.
Yeah.
Like, I'm on season 2. I'm in the middle of season 2. Okay, so I won't tell you what happens, but I went blah, blah, blah. With Mando, with Andor, even, we just 3 days after after it's out, you're allowed to talk spoilers because we assume everybody has made it along with you, and there's a real benefit to that because there's this community conversation that's happening about the show, which I think that's important for Star Wars. And maybe it's not as important in Marvel, and maybe that's why the Marvel shows don't have that same sort of recognizable buzz to me anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like I do thoroughly enjoy getting up early and watching a new episode, and that happened with Marvel stuff, and that happens with Star Wars stuff.
Yep.
But then at the same moment, like it was like the week of episode 4 or 5 of Andor, they released Tales of the Jedi, and I just watched that in like a 2-hour span. They're shorter, of course, so it's easy.
Yep.
So it's like it's interesting how like those things. It's sometimes I wonder if it's like because like Star Wars Visions just came out as an entire thing. There was no episodic part to it. It's like, are these the things that you're like, well, we got this other little side project, like because I always like what in Disney Plus they have like that Star Wars biomes, which is literally just a screensaver where there's just Star Wars stuff happening. Then they don't talk about it, but they put it on there, and it's just like, that's a cool idea. Like, keep doing it. They do that with The Simpsons, where they put out like a Maggie cartoon. I think they've done a bunch of other different things. It's like they're like, we're gonna test things. We're just gonna like occasionally drop it. Of course, that being said, I don't read every single piece of news that comes out, so maybe there are a group of people talking about things like. I can't think of an example, but like it's just like some stuff I don't pay attention to. I only like my algorithm on my phone tells me what I want to read. That doesn't like, oh, maybe you should read this thing about again Succession. I don't ever search it, so now my phone is probably listening to it. I'll have it in my algorithm. It's interesting. So it's like, I think there isn't going to. I don't think there is a formula. Maybe I'm wrong. It just seems like they're like, we'll try this, and then we'll do this over and over again until it's like people are bored with it, and we'll think up something new. I think that's kind of what, like, especially Andor. I've said this before. It's like you watch the show and you think it's gonna go one way, and it flips the script and goes the other direction. So it's like I have no idea what's gonna happen. And I'm like, and that's awesome. So I don't think it's predictable, but yeah, I think there's a reason to have a binge watch or episodic. I think Game of Thrones proved that in this post streaming world, we're all about like having one show that everyone talks about on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday.
Yep.
So
I would agree with that.
And I unmute my microphone. I am a big weekly watching. That's what I prefer. I've just noticed the way they're telling the stories, but I think you utilize it to a way. That's what I really find is like there's different ways to tell stories, and we're getting there. And there's just the sky is the limit with Star Wars. The movies, we're not talking about movies right now, but I think they're really approaching them. I feel like, and I'm not obviously in those rooms, but it feels like they're approaching them wrong. Because now they're like, Sean Levy's going to do a Star Wars movie, and this guy's doing one, and she's doing one. It's like, but what are you doing? Like, you're just like having a meeting, be like, do you want to do a Star Wars movie? Yes, I do. Of course you do. But what's the story? Like, you can't, I don't know, like, you shouldn't, like Marvel, even Marvel, which I think is very different from Star Wars. Feige's not calling up a director and be like, you want to do a movie? And they're like, well, he kind of did with Michael Giacchino doing World War. But it's not like, you know what I mean? Like, there's obviously a plan, and they're like, we're making this movie. Star Wars needs a plan. They don't need someone to direct a movie. They need someone to be like Jon Favreau is, or Gilroy is, or Headley is. Be like, this is my idea. This is the movie. Because Star Wars is not just, especially now with the streaming stuff, it's not just show up to the theater and let's see if this works. It's Star Wars, right? It's like it's this big epic film franchise.
It almost feels like what Marvel does is like they talk to a director and they say, are you interested in doing a Marvel movie? And they're like, yep. And they're like, good, because we need somebody to do Doctor Strange 3. Okay, you're gonna do that one. Whereas with this, it's like there's gonna be a Taika Waititi movie. Will it? Okay. But why and what's it going to be? It's like, honestly, it's like a pet.
And he doesn't even know.
Right. They're like, you want to do a Star Wars movie? Yeah, I do. Okay. Come back to us with an idea. It's like, in a way, when they advertise animated characters based on the voices. It's like, hey, we need to get Christian Slater to do a voice in this film. When it's going to be him, no matter what. What's he going to be? I don't know. He looks kind of like a fox. All right, we'll make him a fox in this movie, and whereas it's like, Taika, you're kind of witty and clever. What do you want to write about? It's like that's not going to fit into a plan, especially because Star Wars doesn't have a blueprint. Like at least with Marvel, you'd be like, okay, there was that really you like She-Hulk. That's cool. We could probably do something with that. You'd be good for She-Hulk. Versus with Star Wars, is like, I have this crazy idea about a whatever who lives here and does that thing, and they're like, I guess that works in Star Wars. I don't know. So there's no blueprint. There's no place for somebody to bring an idea and see where it fits, and that gets dangerous. I think that's why Solo had its problems.
Well, Solo was George Lucas hired Kasdan to write a movie, and he's like, I want to do Solo,
right?
And he wrote it. Maybe he also should have directed it. You know, there's something. So I mean, Solo's a thing on its own, obviously, with all the problems that had. But the way they're approaching these shows is how they should probably approach the movies. Like these shows, you know, Gilroy shows would be like, well, I'm going to do, you know, I think originally it was 3 seasons, now it's 2. This is what I'm going to do. This is my blueprint. This is the story, and they're like, do it. That's how they should approach the movies, right? If Taika Waititi has a Star Wars idea. What is it? Is it one film? That's not good enough. Get out of here. We need at least. I think it needs to be a minimum of 3 movies. Pitch me 3 movies. If we edgy on it, maybe we'll start with 1. But I think it's got to be 3 movies. You got to be New Line with Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings. Just freaking make all 3 of them. Boom, boom, boom. Have them out the door. Because Star Wars is a saga. It's not. I mean, Rogue One was awesome. We all love it. Andor is obviously benefiting from it. But it's not one movie. It's an entire saga.
And that's what's going to happen with Rogue One by the time it's all done. Is essentially it's going to be like 6 movies or 5 or 6 movies, right? All built in together, which is cool. And it's going to add life to Andor for sure. Rogue One, rather.
Yeah, I got it.
All right, let's go to our top 5 today.
Top 5.
Possibly the easiest top 5 we've ever done. We're going to do top 5 live action episodes of Star Wars. Anything Star Wars streaming that is live action, we're going to do, which would have been a lot easier 4 years ago. By the way, 4 years ago, Mandalorian premiered. 4 years ago, Disney Plus.
That's crazy. That's insane.
Wild. Yeah, and now we're complaining because they used the volume. Back then, we're like, what is it?
Yeah. Where did they shoot this? That's amazing. Oh,
they shot it in a parking lot.
Shot it in front of a big TV. Oh,
but because of that, we got Obi-Wan Kenobi, we got Boba Fett, we got all because of this little show called The Mandalorian that cost $10 million an episode, so it was not that little. We're going to do top 5. Let us know your top 5s too in the comments as well. So my number 5, I'll go. Then Brock, you can go. Then Pete. My number 5 is from the book of Boba Fett, which is I'm a huge book of Boba Fett fan, and anybody that's not Pete will get kicked off of this too. From the desert comes a stranger. I really enjoyed this episode. Sure, most of it might be Baby Yoda. I'm going to call him Baby Yoda. But I like Cobb Vanth. I like the way it ends. I love that we see where it's heading. Maybe it's not as exciting as the last episode. Maybe it is. I don't know. But I just watched it recently too, so recency bias. But I really enjoy From the Desert Comes a Stranger. Brock.
Oh, she didn't write down the titles of the episodes, so I'm gonna.
That's fine.
Try to
I don't
give
know
at
any
least
of the
number.
Andor titles.
He's gonna describe them.
Episode. I'm gonna say, how many episodes of Book of Boba Fett are there? 8 or 6 or 7?
Seven.
I think it's episode 4. 4. Yeah.
Oh, good episode. Yes.
Episode 4, where like Filoni just straight up flexed, and he's like, "Ha, this is actually Mandalorian season 2.5." Like, and I'm like, I can't hate it because we end where he sends Grogu off, and they're like, "Whoa, what are you going to do? What's the season going to be about? Is Grogu ever going to come back?" And they're like, "No, he's going to be back. Don't worry about it."
Yep.
So I just like that alone, and I'm like, and then to have an episode where the main character doesn't even, I think, he appear, or he at least doesn't.
No,
speak.
he literally does not appear.
He doesn't speak, and it's just like, what? But I will, and it sets up the next 2 episodes, which are an amazing, like, Book of Boba Fett, great part. Anyways,
and it sets up the next season of Mandalorian. So anyway, who doesn't like it, Pete, is just wrong.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I don't like the Book of Boba Fett. Just, if I was forced to rank, as we often are, I would have put it there.
Next time we're having your son on, because he's
well, he's much more entertaining.
Did he like Wakanda Forever?
He loved it.
Oh,
he
great.
really liked it. I was afraid it was going to be too long, but he enjoyed it. Yeah.
Oh, great. Sorry, you're up.
No problem. Okay, so my 5th favorite is Chapter 2 of The Mandalorian, The Child, the one with the Jawas, because for me it really set up. It felt very much like a comic book / video game. There was not a lot of speaking. There was a lot of action. There was a lot of, you learned more about the Mando, and we got the Grogu Force reveal. It was a fun episode. And after, being just 2 episodes in and you're so sucked in at that point, it was very well done. So that's my number 5.
I like that episode quite a bit. I won't talk about it anymore because it probably will make an appearance. My number 4, and you know what? My number 4 is from the Andor show. I almost didn't have an Andor episode on here because Andor is like, it's just as a whole, like, do I like any of them better than anything else? Yes, apparently I do. I like No Way Out, the Prison Break episode that your son likes so much. This is why you should be on the show. I like that, but what I loved about that episode was just thinking back to it, Kino Loy. The whole time he knows where he's headed. He knows all. So every time he's reluctant to do something, at first you don't know why, and then you realize, oh, there's no escape for him in at all. Yeah. His escape is death, and that's either be in prison or death. And that whole episode leads to that. And I love all the memes now where he has the little floaties on and stuff like that. They're fantastic. But I mean, there's more to that episode, but that's for me, it's such a powerful part of Star Wars and the Rebellion. Because then you see Luthen later on in that episode give one of the best Star Wars speeches, and he's willing to sacrifice everybody and everything for the Rebellion. And Kino Loy is willing to sacrifice himself to get everybody out of there. So I just love the way it's coming together. That being said, this is the only Andor on my list, so don't be disappointed. But Saw Gerrera in episode 11 was peak for me.
It was, yes, that was great.
But it's not on my list. But because it was recency bias, so I went with that one. All right,
Brock. My number 4 is I'm trying to give like every series shout out. So I'm gonna go Obi-Wan on this one. I think the last episode is a strong conclusion because it kind of gives you an ending to the story, gives you a wrap up of like Leia's story. You get Reva's like turn to good, whatever, or like that the fact that like it's she looked like she gets betrayed, but then she's still a strong character. She comes back. She's not just done in the second last episode. We get Vader who goes to Ben? No, Reva goes there. So it's like you're like, oh, Vader's the big bad guy, but he's not really. Like the villain is kind of Reva, who unfortunately we flip at the end. But you get to see Ben and Uncle Ben? No, it's Spider-Man. Uncle Owen. Uncle Owen and Baru, and like you get all those little extra things. You get like, oh, but what about this? It ties in that little beginning part. And it's a solid episode. Like the series is good, but like you kind of like, here you go. Here's all the things you've been wondering about. And yeah, and of course, young Luke, young Leia. Like, how can you go wrong?
That's cool. My number 4 is the same as James's number 4. It's One Way Out. Just like you said, it was a challenge to pick just one and/or episode because of the way it builds on it. But not only did I think Kino was great, not only did I think the monologue from Luthen was amazing, but kind of seeing the trap that Mon Mothma finds herself in, and it was all about sort of the whole episode was about realization as to where you are, because even Lonnie was like, all right, I'm screwed, and Luthen's like, I'm screwed too, but I'm gonna keep fighting. And Mon Mothma came to the realization she's in it, and she's in it really deep. So I thought that was a great again, to your point, it's hard to pull one out, but that would be the one.
It's, what you said is true too, because a lot of these episodes, if you look, they're all parallels. All the characters and their storylines are parallel to each other during those episodes. It's doing a great job of that. That's a great number 4. I'm going to give you credit.
Oh, thank you.
My number 3 is this Mando season 1 finale, Redemption. Do the wavy hand thing. And I like it. I like IG-11's death. There's just it was a great finale. The punching of Baby Yoda at the beginning. It was a great ending to a series that was our first foray into the Star Wars television shows.
It really was. That was it was a solid ending too. It's what was great too is I think we forget. I think too many shows make their final episode a lead into the next season, whereas they teased the dark saber, which was cool, but if there was no season 2 of Mando, we got a full story, and not enough shows do that now. Yep,
absolutely. Pete, I'll go to you next.
Oh, you go back around the other way, sort of snake.
We have the same number 3, right? So
no, we don't. But in a way, we kind of do, because mine is Mandalorian, the last episode of season 2, The
Rescue. Go ahead.
No, and only because it was a cultural touchstone. I think it was one of those. Bringing Luke back delivered so much to such a wide base of the fandom. I have a video that's on YouTube somewhere of my son watching it also. Just being, that's Luke Skywalker. I know it is. And watching him as an 8-year-old at the time, and then watching Star Wars Theory, another Canadian, sitting there crying over it. It really was. I just like laughing at him crying. But there was the whole concept of just delivering Luke Skywalker back to the franchise was so powerful, and just such a great episode. And you couldn't help but tear up when he hands Grogu over to Luke to leave. It's and then the other piece to it that's so great is a running theme of Mandalorian is the fact that Din Djarin has never seen a Star Wars movie and doesn't know anything about it. He's like, "Are you a Jedi? Are you a Jedi? Luke Skywalker, are you a Jedi?" Okay, yeah. So that's my number 3.
One thing to that point about him not knowing anything about Star Wars, that's one thing with the sequel trilogy that always irked me, was how Luke is that myth. I'm like, but no one knew he went to the Death Star to fight Vader. I kind of like that no one knows who he is at this point. Sure, we'll get to him being a myth, but at this point, I love that. Brock, your number.
My number 3 is also the last episode of season 2 of Mandalorian. I wanted to put
Brock
Mandalorian
is a smart man.
specifically. Mandalorian specific. Just to its own self. There's a second Mandalorian on this one. But I was going to say the first episode where we meet Ahsoka, but that would just be sort of a Filoni flex. but it's like vital because like it's a launching point for the Ahsoka series. It just like in one episode you're like, here's that thing you want. But like I went with the last episode because you're right. It's like it's an amazing episode where it's like, okay, like Grogu gets saved and he has to go away because it's like he like Din can't do anything for him. Ahsoka has told him that like he has to go train. This is not staying with you is not his path if he's going to be a Jedi. And there's a lot of stuff going on in his mind that you can't deal with. And then we got Bo-Katan, so it's like fan service and all this stuff is cool and it's amazing. And they like he vanquishes Moff Gideon. He gets the Darksaber. Great, but like you said, it's like the Luke appearance is almost on par with the Grogu reveal, where it's like nobody had an idea. No one, even the actors have said like we didn't know it was going to be Luke because it's a totally different actor, and they put someone over top, right? And then they put whatever they want in it. But like I remember that vibe of like, oh, there's someone coming in. There's like, oh, and then you see an X-wing, and you're like, it glides in, and it's just like, hello. I can't remember how it goes, but it's like it's kind of like inferred. Like you're like you look at it, and you're like, that's Luke, and you're like, no way. But it just glides. You just see it underneath the ship, and it just glides in. You're like, oh man, and then silhouette, green lightsaber, and you're like, there's no way this is happening. I still now, 2 years later, I'm like, how is that possible? So to the point that when we see Luke in Book of Boba Fett or season 2.5, like it's like, wow, they actually did it. Even though they're like, this is the end of the Skywalker saga. I'm like, no, it isn't. Psych. So, but it's just like that scene of him coming in the hallway and then, presenting himself to our characters. It's like, that's wild. And it's also points out, it's like, just because the actors have aged doesn't mean we can't hypothetically bring back those characters in that time period.
Yep.
It could work. Obviously, it doesn't look perfect. Doesn't look terrible. So it's like that opens a lot of potential for things. So anyway, that's why I like that episode.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's a really good episode. I remember Brock, you texted me while you're watching. You're like, oh my god! It's.
I think I was like, do not go on the internet until you watch it.
It's tough not to go on the internet after these things.
Oh yeah.
Andor is not so hard because it's kind of hard to spoil Andor. Andor is like a weird show where, because there's none of that fan service, there is though because it's Star Wars and all that.
Right.
But it's not like surprise. There's none of that really going on.
Right.
But I love it. My number 2, I'm gonna go with Book of Boba Fett, episode 1. Shoot me if you want. I just loved how it kind of like just went slow and took its time, being like, "That's Boba Fett now. He is a slave." And also, and this part of the story, I thought, and I know I'm one of the 7, but I thought it was really well done. And one of the things that my number 1 is going to show this too is one of the things that I love about Star Wars is when it's a silent film. And I don't know if you've ever seen A New Hope, but like the first 25 minutes is a silent film about a robot trying to find his robot friend, and then he leaves the road. And there's something about that takes me back to that time where I'm like, I don't need them to talk. Now, Andor does a great job of that. Don't get me wrong, but so that proves my point wrong. But there's something with that episode that when he escapes the Sarlacc, which was something I never wanted or cared for, I'm like, I'm into this.
Yep.
And then just seeing where he winds up and his there's something about that show that I really enjoy that nobody else does. And I don't know if I can put it into words, so I'm not going to try. But that's my number 2. And if you disagree, you can write Brock at P.O. Box Brock Spink.
Brocksmink.net.
P, what's your number 2?
My number 2 is one of Brock's, I think Brock's number 5, which was Kenobi Part 6. To see, again, this was that point we made earlier. Like, do we really need to see Kenobi and Vader fight before A New Hope? And they're like, oh yeah, we do. That was pretty awesome. And see, I think the whole thing for me about Kenobi was, Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan and watching, and again, it's similar to Andor. Some of the complaints that this isn't the Obi-Wan that we wanted, or blah blah blah. To watch him grow in 6 episodes from really being just doing the bare minimum, watching Luke and giving up on where he is to, even just the way he's dressed a little bit differently, and the way he smiles at Leia and gives her that little story, or just the interaction between the two of them. What it does for me is, man, when you watch A New Hope now, and just before Vader strikes him down and he looks over and sees Luke and Leia, you're like, wow, that means so much more now, because he was a part of both their lives. And but yeah, I thought six was what we wanted from the Kenobi series, so that's why it becomes at a number 2 for me.
Yeah, great episode. Brock?
My second number 2 is going to be Andor episode 3. I don't know what the title is.
Reckoning.
I thought it was Reckoning.
That was an honorable mention for me.
Honorable mention, because that's good, because I'm going to quote the line that actually uses that word, because it's like, it's the episode that you need in that series of 3 when they launched all 3, that you're like, oh, I see what they're going for here. So it's like, it's vital in that sense, and it's also sort of set up how the rest of the season goes, where it's kind of like in chunks, right? But then also it's like, as much as it's a new show, and there's like, I can't remember what one of you said, and I was like, oh yeah, that's probably slightly better than this, but the scene where this town, Ferrix, is like, they are aware that they are now being invaded by the security company, so that isn't the Empire, but is close. And they're like, okay, shit's going down. Everybody, this is how it's gonna, and like, it's like that, and then you get this awesome monologue with Marva saying like, do you hear that? That's a reckoning. And it's like, it's a little unnerving when you hear that sound, and it's like, but it'll get worse. And it's like, why will it get worse? It's when they stop. I know, and I'm not really quoting it properly, but it's like, well,
you're directionally correct.
When they
he
stop,
auditioned for this role.
The worst, the worst part is when they stop. It's like, what happens then? And then she just sits back and it's like, I'm dying. But like, that scene is amazing, because it's like, it's kind of like, this is kind of like, this is really what's going to launch the rebellion. They exist in pockets, but like, this event caused by Cassian's Andor's search to find the sister that we then never hear about again. It's like, it's the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand that starts World War I. This is the moment, and this is when people start fighting back. And obviously, it has to get to other things, but like, without this moment, it's like, this is when it's gonna get real. And that whole like escape with Luthien and Andor just sort of sets like where this show is gonna go. It's like, yes, you just sat through 2 episodes of people talking, but here you are. Here's your chase scene. Here's your blasters.
Yep.
And it's great. And it's just like, that's a moment in that show where I was like, oh man, what is this? Give me more. So
great. I have a couple honorable mentions. Pete, you have a couple honorable mentions. Brock, do you have any? Is there anything, Brock, that you're like, oh, I should have put this on my list, but I didn't? For me, I'm gonna go with Mando, Chapter 15, The Believer, which is the one without Grogu at all. I love that episode. That was a phenomenal episode, I thought, of Mandalorian season 2. And my other one is Obi-Wan Kenobi episode 1. I thought it was a great reintroduction to Obi-Wan Kenobi and all that. I thought Deborah Chow directed the heck out of that episode. Until Andor, I thought it was one of the nicest looking Star Wars we got in. Andor then came and made me say, "You suck, volume." And then of course my other one is just every episode of Book of Boba Fett. And
I'm not a total Book of Boba Fett hater. Oh my god!
Everybody else is. Don't worry. I know. What were your honorable mentions?
My honorable mentions, one was The Reckoning, as Brock was just talking about, and the other one was one that Brock had on his list, which is the Chapter 13, The Jedi, with the
Jedi.
with Ahsoka, because the fact that first of all, I felt like it was the first episode that Filoni directed that he got it 100% right. Like if you look at the one with the bounty hunter, whatever that one was, that he directed, it was choppy. It was, I'm not a director, so I'm not an expert, but you could tell Filoni brought his vision in. And I just remember watching Rosario Dawson as Ahsoka and recognizing that she put so much care into learning that character that there are just certain little physical nuances that she pulls out from the animation that make you go, okay, yeah, she is Ahsoka. And I just thought the whole episode again, that's the cool thing about Mando is you can go back and I can just go watch that episode and I don't have to watch everything led up to it and everything that came after it. So plus we got Grogu's name in that one. So.
Yeah, I love in Book of Boba Fett when Grogu meets what's her face. She goes, Grogu, that's a horrible name.
Yeah,
because it's like, yeah, you know what we're all thinking. You get it. Brock, any mentions?
It's sort of like any like fan service, like we said earlier, Sarlacc pit, Boba Fett on a Rancor, Ahsoka saying anything to Luke, Luke. What's the other thing I had in my mind? But yeah, just young Leia and Luke, and like it's just sort of like, yeah, it's so nice. Yeah, I think it's one of the episodes I mentioned already, but like them explaining like what the Darksaber could mean for the Mandalorian people, like this is what happened, this is how it all fell apart. It's like I think like that's a big scene. I think that's in the episode I said for Book of Boba Fett. I think it's in that episode. Yep. That's like I think that's a pivotal moment that like is going to play heavily into the next like few seasons of all those shows. But yeah, though it's like with those like I guess what's the second episode of Mandalorian called again? The egg?
The child.
The child.
So they get the gigantic Cadbury egg and they open it up, but then you just get like the mud horn, the slowest car chase with a sandcrawler, like amazing episode.
Segue into my number one, The Child, because it is awesome. It's got like an Indiana Jones reference. There's no talking for 90% of it, which is something I love in my Star Wars, as you know. And we saw Baby Yoda at the time using the Force on the Mudhorn. The Mudhorn becomes a huge thing for the Mandalorian. It's now on him. I remember watching that episode. I was like, that was good, and I've rewatched that more than any other Disney Plus episode of anything. I'm so entertained by it. And Quill is one of my favorite characters. Also, you forget about him every once in a while, but then you're like, wait, nope, greatest thing that ever happened to Star Wars is Quill. So my number one is The Child.
Great episode. Very good episode.
Pete, your number one?
My number one is Chapter 1 of The Mandalorian because it pulled us. Sorry, Brock.
That's okay.
The same list.
Me and Brock are the same. But just because that moment of seeing Grogu for the first time, which of course is burned in all of our brains, and none of us could believe what we just saw. Like all of us, anybody who's a Star Wars fan, just like, and it launched. I mean, people who don't even know how to spell Star Wars are Grogu fans. It's remarkable. But also, I loved it had all those pieces of Star Wars. It had the humor, right? It had because Star Wars with a funny droid is always good. K2SO is great, and IG-11, continuously trying to say he's going to blow himself up was hilarious during that battle scene. It was hilarious. So, but to me, it also made us all, I think, as Star Wars fans, breathe a collective sigh of relief that, okay, this is going to work. This is going to be that they can make Star Wars on TV and it doesn't look bad. It doesn't feel bad. It doesn't feel like it's out of place. It feels like it should be here.
Yeah, my number one is also episode number one, because it's like you watch that show and you're like, oh, this is exciting. I'm like, yeah, okay. Let's talk about a guy that's kind of like that one guy in the back of like 3 scenes in the original trilogy that everyone just loves. Like Yeah, okay, I'm in. Like, yeah, you either coming in cold or warm or cold. I'm like, yeah, cool, man. And IG-11 moving around, just like
Oh yeah,
the way he
blowing
can
shit up.
shoot is just like, oh, this is like it. So you sit there like, this is exactly what George Lucas has been dreaming about for the last 30 years. But then you get that scene. The best kept secret in Star Wars outside of Luke, I am your father is, guess what? We have another Yoda.
Yeah.
And it captures our imagination for 20 more episodes. But like that scene at the very, very end where like the cradle opens and Grogu or like Din puts his hand down and you see the little hand come out, and you're like, this is what the Star Wars TV series or TV world is going to be about. It's like we just gave you something new, and you just are about to go on a journey you were not expecting. And it's like it's paid off. It's just like this is the new era. So shocking that we're not getting movies, but like I can't complain about what Star Wars is today, and that scene is just explains everything of what we're talking about today.
It's really like, somebody says, I'm going to give you a new car. And you're like, okay, cool. I'm going to get a Hyundai. And then they take you outside after all the buildup. You're like, yeah, I'm going to drive my new car. They give you the keys. And it's like, it's a freaking whatever Maserati. And you're like, holy cow, that is not what I was expecting.
It's the Batmobile.
But
you're like, what?
Yeah, what? Yeah. So yeah, I agree. That's why it's number one for me too. And what I always remember about that time was it was before Rise of Skywalker came out, and I remember going to see Rise of Skywalker. I saw it like 5 times the opening weekend, but one of the times I saw it was with my brother-in-law and his wife. Now his wife is definitely one of those people who's like, Star Wars, is that the one with the guy with the pointy ears, or is that the and when we walked out, she was like, wasn't there supposed to be like a baby Yoda in this? So he had already taken hold of the pop culture within 2 months. So
and now I see people hating on Baby Yoda, and I'm like, what is wrong with you people?
How
like,
can you
Baby
hate
Yoda's-
Grogu?
You can't. It's jealousy. That's what it is.
That's what it
It's
is.
but I mean, Grogu represents everything we love about Star Wars.
Yeah.
Like, just like I want that toy. That's what we love about
I want that toy. I want to use the Force. I want to be an alien creature that doesn't one of the few races that doesn't have a name yet in the Star Wars world.
Yeah.
So
kind of wish we called him Baby Yaddle.
Nobody called him Yaddle.
No,
Why?
let's call him Yaddle. I haven't seen that Tales of the Jedi. Well, maybe by the time this comes out, I have, but I haven't seen Tales of the Jedi yet with Yaddle. I saw a clip of Yaddle. I'm really excited. I am excited though for the future of Star Wars because now we've seen like the Mando stuff and we've seen Andor and Star Wars. I think as far as the three of us are concerned, it works both ways.
Yes, 100%. Yep.
Okay, let's Brock with the thumbs up. All right, let's wrap it up. We've been doing this long enough. Pete, you've got a turkey to go eat, and Brock and I are working because it's just a Thursday here in Canada.
Just another
Pete,
Thursday.
tell everybody where they. Oh, we didn't even talk about the friggin' Andor season 2 thing we were supposed to talk about. We'll have to do that another time. Time. Pete, tell everybody where they can find you and why you might like streaming Star Wars or know a thing or two about it.
Yeah, so we have what we call the ATG Cast podcast stream, which includes my show Around the Galaxy, which is a bi-weekly interview show. We talk to the people behind the fandom, try to capture that moment when 2 Star Wars fans meet for the first time. I've been very lucky to have voices and authors and creators on the show. And then there's also Podcast of the Wills, which is my partner in crime, Nick Milkey, and he also does, but he takes a slightly different approach, kind of looks for that sort of spiritual moment of Star Wars for somebody, and it's kind of it's a cool show. But also live on Friday nights, we do a show called Streaming Star Wars, where we talk about whatever the show of the week is, and then we try to take a different approach. One of the cool things about our Friday night live show is that it's, there's 1,000 day of shows that come out on Wednesday nights where people recap we've had a couple days to think about it. So we usually focus on something that struck us and have a conversation. And we take people's calls live on the show so people can get involved and give us their thoughts on whatever's happening in Star Wars. But you can find all that stuff at atgcast.com, or you can follow me on Twitter and see me probably getting arguments with somebody from the Fandom Menace at atgcast. Try to stay out of trouble, but it doesn't always work. So,
Brock.
I'm on the Rebel Scum podcast where we talk about Star Wars. You can check my LinkedIn out. I'm not looking for work, but just check it out. Yeah.
Definitely check out hgcast.com. I was on your show like 17 years ago.
You were. Absolutely.
People still say that I am the reason why you've succeeded.
Yeah, people say that. People do say that.
They do not.
Not a lot of people, but a couple people have definitely said that. Mostly you, but
mostly
it's
me
true.
And my rabbit. Yeah.
But no, I do have to say honestly, what I did love about the episode was, and this is what I love about why I like doing my show, because I do get to just have I literally, the prep I do for my show is like, can you show up at 6:00 or 7 better? And that's the prep. And we talk, and it doesn't matter if it's Kevin Scott or if it's whoever. It just like, come on the show and let's just talk about Star Wars and see where it goes. And the conversation we had was so much fun. And I'll send you a link to it if you want to put it in the notes. So after people hear this amazing episode, they want to hear just you and me talk. And Brock, I have to get you on the show sometime.
Yeah.
But we'll make that happen.
Well, if ATGcast can handle that much awesome at the same time,
it would be.
I'll
rough.
put the link in there. But people at Thanksgiving are going to blow up when we go with that 1-2 punch.
Yes, Thanksgiving ever.
Go back to your turkey. That's Pete. That's Brock. I'm James. And Brock, you were always. Oh, thanks for watching, everybody. Give us like a that. Brock, you were always scum.
Rebel Scum.
Hey scumbags, thanks for watching. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up on our video. As always, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Rebel Scum Podcast, for all the latest videos.